Good evening, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 3rd, 2011 meeting of the Murfreesboro Planning Commission. We have a quorum present, so I'll call the meeting to order at this time. The first item on tonight's agenda is to approve the minutes of the June 15th, 2011 Planning Commission meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? If not, I'll declare them approved as submitted. We have 6 public hearings scheduled this evening, the first of which is a zoning application for approximately 5.9 acres from CL to CH, south of State Route 99, which is the New Salem Highway. The applicant is the World Outreach Church of Murfreesboro. Ms. Ely, good evening.
Thank you.
How are you?
Good evening. I'm doing well. Our first public hearing this evening is a part of one request made by the World Outreach Church. The church has about 83 acres for which they're requesting a zoning change, but staff divided that request into 3 portions, so there'll be 3 public hearings so that folks will have an opportunity to speak specifically about each zoning change. And I've got a map that shows all 3 of the public hearings, if I can get there, on the screen now. But the purple area that says CL, Commercial Local District, is the subject of this first public hearing. And so this map shows just that area. The subject property is located along the south side of New Salem Highway, or Highway 99, and along the western side of Barfield Road. It's currently zoned CL, which is Local Commercial District, and came into the city with an interim zoning of CL when it was annexed. During the time it was annexed, it was used as a training facility for truck drivers, but as you may know from driving to the site today, it's currently used by the church and as their leadership park. They're requesting that the zoning be changed from CL, Local Commercial District, to CH, which is our Commercial Highway District. The properties to the north are the part of the second and third public hearing we're going to have this evening. The property or the portion of the property that's adjacent to the CL zoned property that's currently zoned RS-15 is a part of the main sanctuary of the World Outreach Church, and there's no change being requested for that property. Just across Barfield Road, there's a little corner that's zoned RS-15, and that's going to be the subject of our fourth and fifth public hearing this evening. And then just along those borders is the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. The Commercial Highway District is one that you would normally find along Old Fort Parkway or maybe Memorial Boulevard, along those highways. So the types of uses that you see there are the types of uses that would be permitted in the CH zone. The maximum height in the CH zone is 75 feet. The applicants did hold a neighborhood meeting for the request at the church, and it was well attended by people, I guess neighbors and property owners and just interested people who had an opportunity to come and hear the specifics about the application and meet the applicants. Planning staff was there as well. But the Planning Commission will need to conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning just this 5.9 acre portion of property from CL to CH. I think that Mr. Bill Huddleston, who represents the applicants, has a short presentation before you do get into that public hearing. I'll go ahead and invite him up to the lectern at this time. If you have any questions, staff will be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Margaret Ann. Good evening, Chairman Lamb and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Bill Huddleston, President of Huddleston Steel Engineering, and we are pleased tonight to be here to present some zoning requests for the World Outreach Church. As you know, the church has made a significant investment out along State Route 99. This particular request is for the area that we call Leadership Park, a complex that's used for youth programs and leadership training by the church. We're asking you to zone this CH from the CL zoning where it is currently. We feel that the changes in the area, primarily the State Route 99 interchange and the future 5 laning of New Salem Highway, makes this appropriate zoning for that area. And we will be happy to answer any questions now or after the public hearing.
Mr. Huddleston, I was told that any development of these parcels would be delayed until after Highway 99, the improvements to Highway 99 were completed?
That's correct. We have no immediate plans for any sort of development on these properties. We haven't been contacting anybody or contacted by anybody.
Okay, I just think that's an important point to bring out at this time.
I agree.
Any questions for Mr. Huddleston?
Mr. Chairman, due to my affiliation with World Outreach Church, I have to excuse myself from discussion and voting on the set appropriation on the agenda.
Let the record show Mr. Clark will abstain from discussions or voting upon this proposal, and I presume we can go ahead and say all three of the World Outreach Church proposals before us tonight, so we don't have to repeat it every time. So, any other questions for Mr. Huddleston?
I have a question. Mr. Huddleston, just knowing how the state builds roads, where are we on the development of Highway 99?
Basically,
Or not knowing how the state builds roads?
Right. Basically what happens when you have a state project such as this, it's divided into three phases. One's the design phase. That phase has been completed. Number two is the right-of-way phase, and the state is currently very aggressively pursuing the right-of-way in that area. So we're in the second phase, the right-of-way phase, and the third phase will be the construction phase.
But there's no real, no one can really say when they're going to start construction.
Somebody with traffic staff would probably have a better idea of when it's scheduled for. It is in the state process, but it's not actually funded at this time, so it's hard to say whether they'll stick to that schedule or not, given the economic state of things.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Huddleston.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions or comments, we'll open the public hearing. Before we ask everybody to come forward, I'll briefly go over the rules we conduct our public hearings here. We'll open the public hearing. If you have something you'd like to say either for or against the proposal, please come to the microphone, state your name, give your address, keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes, and make all your comments or questions to the Planning Commission itself. Your questions will be noted, and the staff will answer your questions at the end of the public hearing. All that being said, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak either for or against this proposal. Anybody at all? Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments or questions from the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed?
One abstention.
One abstention, Mr. Clark. The second public hearing is a zoning application for approximately 24.9 acres from RS-10 to Commercial Highway north of State Route 99, New Salem Highway. World Outreach Church of Murfreesboro Incorporated is the applicant. Ms. Healy.
Thank you again. This is the second of the 3 public hearings that we're holding for the application made by the World Outreach Church. This portion of the request is to rezone 24.9 acres that is currently zoned RS-10, which is single-family residential district, to CH, which is highway commercial district. And I'll just direct your attention to the map for a moment, and you'll see that the area that's shaded green is located along the northern side of New Salem Highway, just across from the intersection of Barfield Road, and that is the location that they're requesting for the property to be rezoned. On this property, there's a residence, and then there's a parking lot and some recreation facilities and a barn. So for those people who drive by the property, that's how you can identify the portion. They're requesting for this to be zoned CH for Highway Commercial District. We just discussed the property across the street that's currently zoned CL, and you made a motion to recommend changing that to CH. Again, the RS-15 property that's across the street is the subject of a later public hearing, but currently is zoned RS-15. The property that's adjacent to this green area is the part of the third public hearing. And then just across New Salem is World Outreach Church. The commercial highway district, of course, allows a broad range of commercial uses. As I mentioned before, those would be the ones that you would normally see along Old Fort Parkway or Memorial Boulevard. They run in a linear fashion along highways and major roads, and of course Highway 99 is both a highway and a major road. A significant portion of this property and I'll go to this other map, is within the Spence Creek floodway, and a portion of it's within the West Fork Stones River floodplain. And you can see on the map that it shows the locations of those floodway and floodplains. Any development that would happen would have to comply with our water quality protection ordinance. We would limit development out to keep it out of that floodway, and then of course we would have some restrictions on any development within the floodplain. So they would be required, whoever decides to develop this property, and whenever they do it, they'll be held to those standards. This property will be served with a connection from New Salem Highway, and this was a part of the neighborhood meeting that the applicants held on July 26th. They also discussed this matter, and that was a well-attended public hearing, as I mentioned before. This is the second of the 3 public hearings, and so people have an opportunity to speak either for or against the request to rezone 24.9 acres located along the north side of New Salem Highway from RS10 to CH. Let me ask and see if there's a... Okay. Mr. Huddleston's going to address this portion of the request.
Thanks again, Margaret Ann. Chairman Lamb and the Commission, I just want to make, I guess, one clarification and one comment. The clarification is none of this part is actually in the floodway. We do have floodplain on this property, which would make it very difficult to develop RS10, nor is that really, would that really be an appropriate zoning along 5-lane highway. The other point I wanted to make, and we sort of touched on it in the last discussion, but during this right-of-way acquisition phase that the state is pursuing, there's a lot of back and forth between the property owner, which is the church, and TDOT in terms of what's the appropriate types of accesses that TDOT ought to provide us with their widening, and what kind of drainage provisions should be made along this pieces of property due to the widening. And so if the state knows that we're really looking at commercial down the road, they can accommodate us better through that process. Be happy to answer any questions before the public hearing.
Mr. Huddleston, give me a little help on the difference between floodplain and floodway.
Floodway is basically the part along the stream where the floodwaters flow through, and that's where the moving waters travel through. We can actually encroach in the floodplain, actually fill and create certain types of developments in the floodplain. As long as we preserve the floodway and do not fill in that, the 100-year flood elevation will not be raised more than a foot during the 100-year rainfall event.
But you're still going to have some development issues with the floodplain and the floodway as to reduce the size of the actual, not the size of the property, but the size of the development property. Actually,
the floodway is all in the multifamily part of our request, which comes next. This commercial part of our request, and that was what I was trying to clarify in the beginning, the commercial part of this request just has floodplain that we can fill and develop. The floodway, a lot of the floodway, in fact, all the floodway that we're addressing tonight is in the RM16 portion.
I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll open the public hearing in just a second. Okay. It's from the Planning Commission now. Okay. I'll open the public hearing. Ask anybody to come forward that would like to speak.
I'm very new to all this.
Yes, ma'am, that's okay. Please state your name and your address, and then
yeah.
we'll be glad to take note
Anna
of your
Moore,
question.
2235 Valley Grove Drive.
I'm sorry, what was the name again?
Anna Moore, M-O-O-R-E.
What is your question, Ms. Moore?
Well, and what was he saying, that they might build some stuff in the floodplain? They might put some of the commercial property in the floodplain? Did I understand you correctly?
The floodplain can be filled to accommodate that, but we will have him come back up after the public hearing and address that, if you don't mind.
Okay. So I'm concerned about the floodplain and the Stones River and the Greenway, and I want to protect our natural resources, and I don't want a lot of toxic things like stuff from toxic stuff that comes off of cars and goes into parking lots washing down into the Stones River. And that's my objection to this. Other than that, I don't have any objection.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Moore.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you coming up. Would anybody else like to speak?
My name's Ken Ward. I live at 2102 Eastview Drive. I'm confused about a lot of things. I didn't know there was a neighborhood meeting. This was the only information I was given about the town meeting. So all of this going on, I don't know how many of the neighbors or neighborhood or residents around me are concerned, but widening the road is one thing. When you start putting commercial development, are we not concerned with losing some privacy in the area? I completely object to it. Nothing disparaging World Outreach selling the property and being able to profit from it or whatever the reasons, but there are things that come with development, so I'm curious to what the extra things are that I'm going to see with commercial development happening behind my house. So ultimately my property backs up directly to World Outreach property. So, but that's it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you coming up. Anybody else?
Chairman Lamb and members of the Planning Commission, my name is Richard Stewart, and I own some property just north of this property. After looking at the plans, the buffer zone that you've got, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the widest buffer zones that you offer, if I'm not mistaken. I'd like to show my support for this project and this rezoning. This church has pretty much everything they've done has been a class act, and I'm sure this will be too. What you all have done in the city over the past years has been a great asset, and I'm sure that you'll oversee this just like you've overseen past projects. And I would like to show my support for this, and appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Anybody else?
I'm Ross Bradley. I live at 2816 Beulah Drive. I drive past this site multiple times during the day, and I want to support the project. I think multifamily use in the back will be great with the commercial along the front. I agree with what the last gentleman just said. I think the church has been very responsible. I think the good thing to keep in mind is the fact they've got a large investment across the street, and so knowing that, they have my support.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Would anybody else like to speak? If not, I'll close the public hearing.
Question, Mr. Lamb.
Mr. Young.
I'm not sure who should address this, but let's talk about the water quality control issues, Ms. Taylor.
Let me give it a shot, and I also want to address the floodplain. Inside the city of Murfreesboro, there's two very significant things that affect development along streams. Number one, and it's general for all development in our city, and that is our storm water quality regulations. The days when we would just discharge water into our rivers right off parking lots has changed. We require that there be water quality basins that are designed to take toxins out of the water before they enter the river. And those regulations have been increasingly upped through the years and will be upped and increased in the future. And that comes to us from the federal government, basically because of the Clean Water Act from the 1970s and 60s. These regulations require that when development takes place, that they put in measures to keep erosion from happening while construction takes place, but then after the construction is completed, that parking lots are designed in such a way that and rooftops are designed in such a way that the water first goes into water quality basins to clean it before it enters into the rivers. So we're concerned about toxins getting into the river too, and our regulations are going to address that. The second thing is the flood insurance program. As a community that participates in the flood insurance program, we're required to have a floodplain regulations. These regulations require that we identify a floodway. This floodway was basically comes to us from studies by FEMA, and it is the area adjacent to the river channel that must remain unobstructed so that for the conveyance of stormwater, so that when it floods, big rains up to what they consider the 1% chance, and that's what we call the 100-year flood, and the floodway must remain unobstructed. Now, there's an area that typically floods or would flood in this area if it were not filled that can be developed, and that's what we call the 100-year flood plain. It's outside the floodway, but it's sort of the floodway fringe. It's immediately adjacent to it, and you can fill in that area. And in fact, if you do develop in that area, you're required to, number one, raise your floor elevations so that they're protected from the floods. So that you're required to fill your lot so that it's not going to scour and erode into the greenways and things. So we do allow development in the 100-year flood, but developers must take precautions to protect the community and their own development. The floodway you must stay completely out of. Now, there is something that's sort of a hybrid between the two that is still part of the water quality regulations, and that is what we call the Water Quality Protection Area. We call it the WQPA. And on one of these exhibits that Mr. Huddleston has, you can see it's shown. It's kind of overshadowed by the colors, but you can see he's identified the WQPA. And that's the area that we want it to be naturalized with natural vegetation. It's immediately adjacent to the stream channel, and it may or may not be in the floodway. Most of the time it is, or at least partly in the floodway. But it's the area that we want it to remain with the existing vegetations. We don't want the trees cut down. We don't want them bulldozed. We want them to stay intact in this area. Right now that area is at least 50 feet wide from the stream channel into the property. In the future it may be wider, depending upon what kind of regulations we have to adopt. I do believe my initial conversations with the developer is that there will be water quality basins on the property, possibly a portion of it on the area they're going to propose for multifamily zoning, but it will be outside of outside of the floodway because they can't have that kind of water quality area in the floodway.
And what you just said will apply to both this zoning and then the one coming up next.
Yes, sir, it will. And what I'm saying also applies to property throughout our community now.
And I can assure Ms. Moore that we're going to protect our greenway.
Mr. Adlock, can you, I think Ward was his name, comment about loss of privacy? I presume, I don't think any residential property backs up to this area that's under consideration right now, single family. I think it's on back for the next public hearing, if I'm not mistaken.
The existing subdivisions that are part of the River Rock Estates and I guess that would be Sawyer Green and War Trace subdivisions are all separated from this property by the little Spence Creek and the floodway of Spence Creek and the water quality protection area of Spence Creek. So I'd say that the closest property that has a single-family home in one of those subdivisions is probably 800 to 900 feet away from this property at the very closest. Okay. And it's separated by the floodway of the creek.
Okay. Ms. Moore, I hope that answered your question adequately, but if not, I'm sure Mr. Adelot or members of his staff would be glad to meet with you at the conclusion of tonight's meeting and give you more information on that if you'd like. Mr. Jones, do you have another question?
Chairman Lamb, she's welcome to contact us at our office to talk about our stormwater regulations. We'll be glad to talk with her. And also visit us on our webpage. 893-6441 is my phone number, or www.murfreesborotn.gov. We'll be glad to help her out.
Okay. Mr. Young, do you have something?
No, no, thank you.
Okay. Lost my place here all of a sudden. I think we're ready for a motion, I believe.
Did we close the public hearing?
I did close the public hearing, I believe. Ready for a motion. It's been about an hour ago, wasn't it?
Chairman Lamb, I'll make a motion that we approve subject to all staff comments.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Let the
Motion
record
carried.
show for one abstention.
One abstention, Mr. Clark. The third public hearing this evening is a zoning application for approximately 52.2 acres from RZ, approximately 7.5 acres, and RS10, which is approximately 44.7 acres, to RM16. Once again, the World Outreach Church of Murfreesboro Incorporated is the applicant. Ms. Ely?
Thank you. This is the third of 3 public hearings that we're holding for the World Outreach Church's request, and it is identified on the map before you as the area shaded orange and the area shaded blue. The area shaded blue is currently zoned RZ, which is for 0 lot line residential uses, and the area shaded orange is currently zoned RS10, which is for single-family residential district. The applicant's proposing that the city rezone both the blue and the orange area to RM16, which is multifamily residential district. In that RM16 zone, you typically find apartment communities or some various types of institutional uses. The properties that are the single-family developed subdivisions that are adjacent to the area consist of the Sawyer Green subdivision, the River Trace subdivision, and Case and Grove subdivisions. The properties to the north are also are zoned RS10, and the properties to the west are zoned RZ. Properties to the south, of course, we've discussed as being owned by the World Outreach Church. And just across the West Fork of Strones River is property zoned LI, Light Industrial District. A portion of this property does have access to Stony Meadow Drive, and you can see just a small little blue triangle right here. That current access serves as a road that goes to the City of Murfreesboro's water tower, and I've spoke to neighbors who live just between this. Staff will insist that any access to an apartment, if an apartment were ever to be built, would not use this street or this roadway, primarily because it functions for access to the water tower, and also we want to avoid having traffic travel on that street. I did include a map prepared by the City of Murfreesboro that shows the floodway and the floodplain. Our map varies a little bit from the one submitted by Mr. Huddleston. We've just used the FEMA's information and overlaid it on the property, so the floodway is slightly wider, but Mr. Huddleston, I'm sure, has surveyed the property and properly located those floodplains, but that's where I've gotten that information. The greenway system, of course, does run along this area, and it's a new section of our greenway, and I think that's something we're really proud of. The applicants, again, did hold a neighborhood meeting, and they discussed this portion of the request to rezone the property from RZ and RS10 to RM16 multifamily residential district. The neighborhood meeting was well attended, and I've gotten not plenty, but I personally have had over 70 phone calls regarding the signs that I've put out on the property and the notice I put in the paper and the mail out. So I think that there's been quite a bit of interest, and I'm surprised there aren't more people here. But I think that Mr. Huddleston probably wants to speak to the multifamily portion of this request, and after he does, you should hold your public hearing before considering rezoning this property to RM16.
Thank you, Ms. Ely.
Good evening again, Chairman Lamb and members of the Planning Commission. We're throwing some colors at you tonight. We are requesting that 52.2 acres of this property be rezoned to RM16 on the north side of State Route 99. What you'll see, that 52.2 acres is divided into 3 colors on the map I'm showing, green, blue, and purple. The purple is the floodway. That's 18.4 acres that we will not be able to do anything with other than drain through, but basically preserve so that flooding downstream will not occur because of our development. That leaves 33.8 acres of RM16 that we're looking for rezoning on, and wanted to let you know that 7.5 acres of that already is RZ, and that's what the green color is. We will be providing a regional stormwater quality facility. Lady asked about that in the previous public hearing. Most likely in that blue area at the top of the yellow area that's surrounded by purple. That is the location. The northernmost corner of this property, which is the lower part of the property, will be a regional stormwater facility, which is how we provide the best cleaning of the stormwater before it gets to the Stones River. There'll also be one on the west side of the purple floodway up against it in that blue area. We will be providing good access to this property to State Route 99. That's why you see a blue portion to the south right beside the yellow along State Route 99. We see that that will be the access to the RM16 property, and of course we'll have to build a significant bridge to get to the back part because we know we do not want to access through Stony Meadow Drive, and we know the residents don't want that either. I want to show you this one more map before we start the public hearing. This is the city zoning map, and you'll see, I don't know if you can see it or not, it doesn't show up too well, the green outlines of the rezoning requests on the south side of State Route 99. The reason why I wanted to show you this map is because you can see from an overall planning standpoint that the commercial highway that we've already asked for and the RM16 that we're asking for now provide a transition between the heavy industrial areas to the east and the single-family areas to the west. In other words, good regional planning provides a transition. You don't normally go straight from heavy industrial to single-family, and so that's why we think these rezoning requests are very appropriate for this area, not only for that, but also the transportation improvements that have gone on and are going on in this area. We did have a good neighborhood meeting last week. It was well attended, and we answered a lot of questions, and we think we got a lot of them answered, but there may be some more tonight. And I'm here, and Mr. John Harney is here as well with representatives of the church in case any questions come up after the public hearing, or right now I can answer any.
Mr. Huddleston, a couple of quick questions. Would you put the other map back up that you had previously? If you said something about it, I missed it. The little triangle that's to the east, right there, the blue triangle that's between the yellow and the purple and right on Highway 99. What do you have planned for that?
Nothing's really planned for that. That's just an area that we thought might be needed that's outside of the floodway. Don't know, maybe for a sign or something for an apartment site. Not really sure what that would be, but we thought there would need to be a little bit outside the floodway along 99 at that location.
Okay. This would be a staff question before we open the public hearing. Mr. Adlott, if you could briefly go over the city's regulations for the separation between what kind of buffer would be between the RZ property and RM16.
We have a variety of buffers depending upon the intensity of land uses permitted in different zones. What I'm looking for right now, and I'm flipping through my zone ordinance, is a table that answers that question. When property is zoned RM16 and it is being developed adjacent to property that is zoned RZ, it's required to have a type C buffer. That buffer is to be a minimum of 12 foot wide, and it is to be planted with a variety of deciduous and evergreen trees and shrubs to create a dense visual barrier. The next higher would be a type D, and it's the kind of buffer that you'd require between commercial highway and single family, or between heavy industrial and multifamily. And of course, the most high would be industrial immediately adjacent to a single family. A type C buffer is considered to be very good. It's fair. It's very demanding.
The specifics on the buffer and if the developer was proposing to put any kind of fencing up would come at site plan approval time, would it not?
Yes, sir, it would. A fence is encouraged in these kind of situations because they actually can actually decrease the number of trees planted. The width of the buffer must stay the same, but the amount of trees and vegetation. Some places a fence actually is a better buffer, and we would look at that during site plan review.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Adelot from the Planning Commission?
The little sliver, again, I want to make sure that goes down to the water tower is not intended to ever be used as a major street tying into the existing neighborhood.
I don't know what someone may intend in the future, but I can tell you that from the planning staff standpoint, we don't believe that it has the characteristics that are necessary to make for a direct access into a multifamily development. We believe that it was designed and intended to be used for access to the water tower, and that is its best use. At the very most, I might consider it as a secondary access to be gated and only to be used for emergency services in the event of a tornado or a severe storm or a severe flood or something that causes a life safety situation to exist and the need for emergency services to access that property.
Okay. My next question, Chairman, is I'm looking at this map and I'm looking at the single-family development that backs up to this, and I don't see, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's any way or anything where there would be direct access from the neighborhood to this property. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, sir, it is. The only point of access onto Stony Meadow Drive is from that appendage that we just discussed that provides access to the water tower.
So the neighbors won't have to worry about apartment traffic coming through their neighborhood?
That is correct, and I will reinforce that with that it would be a strong desire of the planning staff that any multifamily complex have direct access to State Route 99 where it belongs.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the Planning Commission?
Chairman Lanham, I have one for Mr. Huddleston. You addressed this, but I didn't follow it. So the northernmost point of the RM16 that we're speaking of, would there be access to that via the commercial highway?
Talking about putting storm drainage detention.
Is that so? That whole area is just going to be a storm drainage detention area.
Most likely, yes.
Itself?
That's right.
Okay.
That's the most logical place to put a regional stormwater detention facility. Yes.
Mr. Halliburton, I want to provide, I know the public hearing hadn't been opened yet, but I do want to tell you, this is a really tough piece of property because of the amount of floodplain and the way the creek crosses and the way it's adjacent to Stones River. The floodplain is going to provide some distinct challenges to any development on the property. One thing that a floodplain and a floodway can offer a multifamily development that can become an amenity is the open space that it can provide and the opportunity for recreational trails and possibly a connection to the greenway, or possibly even a private greenway over to the public greenway. In my discussions with the church representatives, they don't have a developer right now ready to do anything. But they're wanting to go ahead and get zoning squared away. And in looking ahead, I felt that I would rather see a multifamily zoning immediately adjacent to the greenway than have commercial highway directly adjacent to the greenway. And being sensitive to that consideration, they viewed it the same way. That rather than have a commercial parking lot, they might rather see maybe a green element of a multifamily development. But they don't know today who's going to be developing or what. But by setting in motion today the zoning, it may shape the future outcome. And I think I prefer that future outcome much over the idea of a commercial use or parking lot immediately adjacent to the greenway.
I understand. I was just trying to figure out it was going to be, I would think, very expensive to put if they're going to have access to that northernmost area, to put a bridge over the floodway. So you're going to have some sort of access between the commercial highway and that piece of property.
Yes, sir. From a service standpoint, that will have to be done. At the very least, for maintenance and service, it will be. But in the future, when development occurs, a footbridge or a less than a vehicular pathway, like Blue Cross or the Greenway, may be more economical.
Okay.
Mr. Alon, there's a similar situation here in town at Rivermont Apartments on Thompson Lane, where they have a very, very large green space between their apartments that backs up to the greenway along Stones River, and it's 150 yards deep between there and the apartments, and they use it as a recreational type thing. There's no trails or things like that, but people are walking down there all the time.
Yes, sir. That's a floodway behind Rivermont, like we're talking about here.
Similar to what we're looking at here.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Anybody at all? Seeing nobody coming forward, I'll close the public hearing. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the Planning Commission?
Move for approval.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. The motion carries.
One
abstention, Mr. Clark. Thank you, Mr. Clark. We'll move on to the next item on the public hearing agenda. That would be the annexation request for approximately 0.10 acres located southeast of the intersection of Barfield Road and State Route 99, New Salem Highway. Pinnacle Bank is the applicant. Ms. Ely.
Thank you. This next public hearing, our fourth one of the evening, is to consider the annexation of a very small portion of property located at the corner of Barfield Road and New Salem Highway. The property is shown on the map before you. What's colored yellow is what's already in city limits. And then this little blue triangle is the subject of this public hearing. The property in total is about 2 acres, with 1.9 acres of it already being in city limits. There's a 0.1 acre portion that is currently not located in city limits. The property is owned by Pinnacle Bank, and they are requesting, for simplicity's sake, that this entire parcel be within the city of Murfreesboro, so that's why you are considering an annexation. The property, of course, should be familiar to you because we just held 3 public hearings for the property directly across the street, which you were recommended to be zoned to CH and RM16, across the highway, I should say. And then across Barfield Road is property that is currently the Leadership Park that you've requested be zoned to CH. The property is within the Murfreesboro's urban growth boundary, and it's contiguous with current city limits. The unincorporated area is along the eastern and southern sides of this property. I have prepared a plan of services for you, included in your packet, and so when we have our public hearing, of course, you'll have a public hearing on that plan of services that I've prepared. The city is able to provide services to the property upon it becoming effective. Of course, some of those services will be available when the property is developed. So those will come at a later date, but the city is ready and poised and will be able to provide services to this property. You should conduct a public hearing regarding this plan of services. I'll be able to answer any questions you have either before or after the public hearing, but there is a companion zoning change request, which will be the subject of the next public hearing, but is not the subject of this public hearing. This is just to consider annexing 0.1 acres into the city limits.
Okay.
Oh, and I had a special request for a map, a zoomed-out map by Mr. Young. And here is the map that I prepared for you. It shows what we've just considered the CH property, which is in pink, or it's salmon on the map. The RM16 property in orange. The subject property is in blue. The entire property will be the subject of the rezoning, but for now, this little portion is the subject of the annexation. And so it's at a view that's further out. You can see this is Warrior Drive. And this is the ramp for the interstate. So if you have questions about that view, I'll be glad to answer those questions as well.
Mr. Young, did that meet your specifications, sir?
My aging eyes could not read this little bitty tiny thing that we had, so thank you, Ms. Ely. I appreciate you accommodating me on that.
You're welcome. I even increased the font of the street names.
Okay, that's enough. You made your point.
When we get your age, we'll need the same thing, Jim.
It's also for Mr. Adelot's benefit, so. It's not bad.
Thank you, Ms. Ely.
Moving right along. Anything else, Ms. Ely?
Not from me, sir, just the public hearing.
Are there any other comments or questions from the Planning Commission? We have 2 abstentions, I believe, so Ms. Jones, would you like to start?
Yes, sir. I just will be abstaining from this. My husband works at Pinnacle, and so I will not be involved in the discussion or the vote on these 2 items.
Mr. Halliburton?
I will be abstaining also from discussion and voting due to my affiliation with Pinnacle on both of these items.
Thank you very much. This time, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody that'd come forward that'd like to speak either for or against this proposal. Seeing nobody come forward, I'll close the public hearing. If there's no other questions, we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval, subject to all staff comments.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None, and 2 abstentions, Mr. Halliburton and Ms. Jones. Moving on to the next item is a zoning application to rezone approximately 1.9 acres from RS-15 to commercial highway and to zone approximately 0.10 acres commercial highway simultaneous with the annexation located southeast of the intersection of Barfield Road and SR 99, the New Salem Highway. Once again, Pinnacle Bank is the applicant. Ms. Ely.
Thank you again. This is a public hearing to consider rezoning the property we just annexed and the remaining portion of the property that's already within city limits. The property is located on the corner of Barfield Road and New Salem Highway, or Highway 99. The map that you have before you and on the screen shows the property in orange and in blue. The area that is shaded orange is already within Murfreesboro city limits and is zoned RS-15. It was zoned RS-15 when it was annexed into the city, so that became its interim zone. And the property that, or the portion or the triangle that's shaded blue is the property that is in process of being annexed, and that is just the remaining part of the property that is not currently in city limits, but you've approved a plan of services for us to annex that 1/10 of an acre. So the way to say that this entire 2 acres is being requested to be zoned CH is that a portion is being rezoned from RS-15 and a portion is being zoned CH simultaneous with annexation. So it's just a long way of saying the same thing. Across the highway is the property that you considered for rezoning, and across Barfield Road, CL is the Leadership Park, which you also considered rezoning to CH. The south and the east are mostly undeveloped. I think there's a residence to the east, and they're in the unincorporated area of Rutherford County. There would be a Type D landscape buffer that's required between a proposed CH district and any adjacent RS district, and if there's a single-family home that's adjacent to this, they would get that wide buffer. This rezoning request is also in line with our land use plan. Our land use plan recommends that this be used in a commercial fashion so that the CH zone is appropriate. Well, it follows, I don't know if it's appropriate, that's your decision. The land use plan does recommend it, though. You should conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning this entire 2 acres to CH. Staff will be glad to answer any questions you have either before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Ely. Any questions for Ms. Ely before we open the public hearing? Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll open the public hearing and ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Seeing nobody come forward at this time, I'll close the public hearing. If there's no further questions or comments from the Planning Commission, we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion we approve the zoning.
Second.
For that, you meant the annexation?
Me.
Okay, you're zoning. Yeah, the zoning. It's already in. Nice. Motion is made to approve and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? With 2 abstentions, once again, Mr. Halliburton and Ms. Jones. The final public hearing today is a proposed amendments to the sign ordinance regarding BZA procedures and tenant signs for end or corner tenants. City of Murfreesboro's applicant. Ms. Kerr, good evening.
Good evening, Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you. This public hearing is for proposed amendments to some of the provisions of the current sign ordinance. The first provision pertains to the time limit allowed of 10 days for a sign permit applicant to file an appeal to the BZA under the current sign ordinance. The current zoning ordinance allows 15 days to file for a variance or an appeal to BZA. The change is requested for the sign ordinance to mirror the zone ordinance of 15 days. The second amendment is the time frame allowed for an appeal to be heard by the BZA. Currently, the sign ordinance states that the next meeting following 45 days after a filing an appeal. The zoning ordinance states not more than 45 days after an appeal is applied. For consistency purposes, staff proposes this ordinance amendment be the same for the sign ordinance as is the zoning ordinance, which is not more than 45 days after the appeal is applied. The third item is for corner and end tenants in multi-tenant buildings with separate outside entrances in all zoning districts be allowed 2 signs on their tenant spaces and on different facades or fascias. And then recent ordinance amendments, if y'all remember back in December, there were some approved amendments to the sign ordinance that would allow this for tenants in multi-tenant buildings to have 2 signs as long as they were on a corner or end tenant. And this is just to make these changes where they are allowed throughout the entire city now in all zones. Staff is available to answer any questions you may have now or after the public hearing.
Any questions for Mrs. Kerr? Think not. Thank you, Ms. Kerr. In that case, I'll open the public hearing, asking anybody to come forward that would like to speak either for or against this proposal. Again, seeing nobody come forward, I'll close the public hearing for the wishes of this commission.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for approval.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. That concludes the public hearing portion of our agenda this evening. We'll move on to plats and plans. One item under plats and plans is a Family Dollar site plan for 8,181 square feet on .99 acres zone commercial fringe located along the Lascassas Pike. Peter Whiteley is the developer. Ms. Logan, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Lamb and members of the Planning Commission. This evening I have for you the site plan for a Family Dollar. It's for 8,181 square feet on .99 acres, or actually I think the surveyor came back at exactly 1 acre of property located along Lascassas Pike. And this is going to be next to the new subway building that was constructed. So if you've seen that recently, you'll be aware of the area right across from the Kroger. If we could go to the screen, I wanted to show you the proposed architectural elevations for the Family Dollar. And this should have a color board down here to show you the actual material sample. Oh, it's on the easel. We'll go through that in just a second. Material samples, but it's an all brick building. And they've raised the parapet at the back to cover the mechanical screening and the equipment. We're going to do 2-tone brick on this building so that you have a breaking up of the facade with the brick insets that we've used on some other buildings around town to try to really give it some dimensionality for the building. They're going to use a bronze storefront system, and they've upgraded the lights from the standardized wall packs to the decorative lights. And as of right now, they're looking at using some limestone for the base for where the sign is instead of EFS. That could change back to EFS depending on as they move forward, because we're still trying to work out the stormwater on the site, and that may end up causing them a little issue where that would have to go back to EFS. But even still, the majority of the building will be predominantly brick facade, all 4 sides. And so we thank the developer for working with us on the design of the building. The site itself is in fairly good order. They meet the minimum requirements for landscaping. I would state that they have a requirement that they turn the irrigation system into us for review to our Urban Environmental Department prior to the issuance of a building permit. They've noted that the plan will be, or that the site will be irrigated, which is a requirement under our ordinance, but they have not actually submitted the irrigation plan. In terms of the, as I mentioned a little bit ago about the stormwaters, this site is right on the cusp of meeting the requirements for acreage for the need for stormwater quality. And we're waiting on the survey to be completed, and it could come in at 0.99 acres. It could come in at 1.01 acres. And if it comes in at 1.01 acres, they'll have to meet stormwater quality. If it comes in at 0.99 acres, they don't, because 1 acre is the cutoff in our ordinance. And as of right now, they're showing meeting the stormwater quality ordinance, and they would do that through a detention pond, a stormwater quality unit, and grass channels, and porous pavement at the front. If it comes in less, they'll probably revise their plans, but if you would allow us tonight to approve it, subject to staff having final review of those grading and drainage plans and the stormwater plans, we would appreciate it. But we're still waiting on the final information to come back. In fact, I think we might be having a meeting on it Monday. Other than that, the site is in good order. Their access is already existing off Highway 96 or Las Casas Pike. There's a joint access there that is already in existence. It's a shared access. And if we can go to the screen again, to the site plan, it shows that there will not be any new curb cuts on 96 to accommodate this access drive, which is good. So there shouldn't be any access issues. It's already a curb cut that's in place. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. And if we want to go back over here, this is the proposed colors for the store. This will be the base, and this will be the accent. Here's the bronze aluminum storefronts that we use for. Here's the bronze aluminum storefront, and then here's the base brick, and then there's the accent brick. So I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. And this is not a gateway project, although I think it probably is close to meeting gateway standards. But as we're finding and hearing, I think a lot lately from some of our public hearings and things, this is kind of where we're moving, I think, in terms of the design throughout the community.
Any questions?
Ms. Logan, I have one. In your staff comments, you had a question regarding the dumpster enclosure. Did that get resolved?
Yes, sir. They're going to do the dumpster enclosure to match the facade of the building.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Ms. Logan, it seems to me that this is an upgrade from some of the ones that they have, a considerable upgrade from some of the ones that they built in the past.
I would consider it a considerable upgrade. Their standard is a metal-sided building, and so now we're to an all-masonry building, and not just a masonry building, but I feel a masonry building that has actual design elements. Because as we all know, it's not anymore just about putting brick on the building, because it's just a brick box. It's about actually doing something with the brick and doing something to make it interesting. And by doing the insets, by doing the raised parapet, by doing the cornice, by adding the decorative lights, those are all elements that add to I hope that the community will agree and that you all will agree to the overall attractiveness of the building.
Good job.
Thank you.
Well, I want to commend the developer for doing that, and I'm sure this location will be a very successful one for them. Any other questions? Now we're ready for a motion.
Move for approval, subject to all staff comment.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Logan.
Thank
We'll
you.
move on. Well, we're staying on with us for staff reports and other business. North Church Subdivision, Section 4, revised final design review for the preliminary plat for 2 lots on 2.28 acres. C.M. Gatton, trustee, and Tommy Smith, developers. Ms. Logan.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The subject of this North Church revised plat for tonight, this preliminary plat, North Church Section 4 LLC, is for 2 acres, which is lot number 2, which is at the corner of Gresham Park Drive and Medical Center Parkway, 2 lots removed from the Chamber of Commerce building. It's where the home of the future Matco. They want to do a design change within the subdivision to accommodate drainage and detention. If you'll recall, during the site plan that was approved for the MAPCO, the drainage and the detention for the site, including their stormwater quality, was all going to be underground. At MAPCO's request, the designer, the subdivision, the developer has come back with a plan for an above-ground detention pond on an adjacent lot, number 5, which will be designed to serve both lots 1 and 2 for drainage and part of lot 5 for drainage. This is just because I think really that when they were looking at the overall design for the Matco and trying to look at the cost, that it was just causing them a lot of concern. The staff initially had some concerns about the location of that detention pond and the looks of it, because it will be right next to the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, that's a brand-new building, and I think a building that I hope the community can be proud of, right there on Medical Center Parkway. But this pond will not be along Medical Center Parkway. It will actually be to the back of the lot, and it will be on Manson. And what they have done to accommodate or to address staff's concerns is provided a full landscape plan for this detention pond. It will have trees in it. There's some bald cypress. It will be sodded. It will have a little rock bed in it that will hopefully be both good for the environment and good aesthetically, and that's something that we asked them to do. As part of the Matco site plan, this detention pond would have to be constructed, and the landscaping plan would have to be implemented and planted with the site plan for Matco. So before any CFOs could be issued for the Matco site, this would all have to be completed, including the landscaping. And they're agreeing, nodding their heads. And in addition, Matco, we would ask that the Matco landscaping bond that we require on all new sites to guarantee the landscaping for 3 years, that this also be included within that, so that if there's any issues, that we can keep this area looking nice and healthy as it comes into maturity for those landscape materials. So this has been reviewed by our Urban Environmental Department, and overall we think the landscape plan is in pretty good order. I think we still have a couple of suggestions on maybe a couple of changes, but we can address that at a staff level if you so choose and give us the approval to do so. So that is the main issue before you tonight. One other note that I'd like to state is that on the striping plan for the public roadway improvements that are required as part of this section of the subdivision, and with the Matco, there's still a little work that needs to be done on that striping. And so if the engineer could make sure to get that resolved with our city traffic engineer before any building permits, we would appreciate it. Otherwise, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have concerning this item.
Any questions?
Ms. Logan, all these concerns that you talked about could be addressed administratively?
Yes, sir.
No other questions? We're ready for a motion.
If there are no other questions, Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval is subject to coordination with staff.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item under staff reports and other business is the MAPCO Express revised final design review and site plan for 4,735 square feet or 1.3 acres zone commercial highway, GDO 1, GDO 2, and battlefield protection overlay located at the corner of Medical Center Parkway and Grisham Park Drive. MAPCO Express Incorporated is the developer. Ms. Logan.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This is the revised site plan for the Matco, and it's before you because these two items are intertwined with the subdivision and the site plan. So therefore, we're bringing both of them back to you for review and approval since they're kind of connected. There's really nothing on the actual Matco site itself that's changing, other than that the underground detention now is being removed. But that's not anything that anyone would have seen visually that's changing. The site plan that you approved back in January will remain the same. The architecture for the design of the building was still expected to be the exact same. The canopy, the signage, everything in relation to this site has not changed, with the exception of removing the underground detention and adding it to a separate detention pond at the rear of Lot 5. It should be noted that as part of this site plan, we wanted to make sure we get in the record that it is the responsibility of the MAPCO developer and the subdivision developer concurrently to make sure that this detention pond is installed and functional and landscaped prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the MAPCO. So that's really how it all ties together, because we want it all completed before we issue that certificate of occupancy. In addition, as I mentioned under the previous item, the MAPCO will be responsible responsible for holding any landscape bonds on this, on their property as well as on the detention pond. And from my understanding, that the MATCO is going to be responsible to install the detention pond. For some reason, that fails out or something happens during the project. I mean, we've seen all kinds of things over the last few years happen. Then it would ultimately revert back to the subdivision developer to complete it, or at least to bring it back to some type of workable stage that was acceptable to engineering department. Other than that, there are no other changes, and I don't have any additional comments. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Anyone? Now we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for approval, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Ms. Logan, I think you have one late submission at the request of the staff.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Under other business tonight, we have a request from the S&W Contracting, which is located on Lot 1 of the Morton Building subdivision along Highway 99, if you're familiar with S&W's location. They are looking at doing some installation of solar panels. They're actually working with the electric department, where they're going to actually capture electricity, send it back into their building, and they're working it through TVA. So it sounds like a really interesting project, and I'm sure we're going to see more projects like this in the future, where people are trying to find alternative forms for electricity conversion. But part of the issue that arose during the site plan review was that there was a 15-foot sanitary sewer easement along the side of the property. They didn't realize was there. It didn't show up on any plats, but it was a recorded easement nevertheless. And it runs right through the area where they want to install their solar panels. So they have asked for, there's no improvements in that area, there's no need for the sewer easement, it's not being utilized, and they asked for the abandonment of it. The Water and Sewer Board approved it yesterday at their water and sewer meeting for the abandonment of the easement. We're now taking it before you all tonight for your concurrence, and then we'll move it forward to City Council if you so agree.
Okay. Any questions? If not, we're ready for a motion.
Move for approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Logan. Mr. Aylott, do you have anything else?
No, sir.
Just one thing, if we're getting on up in the year, and if Mr. Lewis could kind of bring everybody up to date on our continuing education requirements at some point between now and the next meeting or whatever, or unless you have it now. Okay. Just whenever we have an opportunity, just let us know so it doesn't sneak up on somebody in the fourth quarter. Okay? If there's no other business, we stand adjourned.
Okay.